My name is Elise Tran, and this is the story of how I fought quietly for my freedom, and how the people who claimed to love me tried to give it away like it was theirs to begin with. It doesn't start with betrayal, not yet. It starts with silence, with the sound of early mornings where the alarm clock wasn't a beep, but the hiss of a bus breaking outside my window because I had a shift to clock into before sunrise. It starts with the smell of burnt espresso grounds in a college coffee shop, and textbooks marked up with highlighters that bled through every page. It starts with sacrifice, 5 years of it. 5 years of saying no to the dinners I couldn't afford. 5 years of watching my peers take spring break photos while I took overtime. 5 years of quiet, consistent effort. I was 19 when I promised myself I'd buy peace, not just a roof, but a sanctuary, a space that belonged to no one but me. Something untouched by the chaos of my childhood home, the noise, the expectations, the thin walls that never let you cry without someone asking why you were being so dramatic. My apartment wasn't luxury, but it was mine. Exposed brick kissed by morning light, quiet corners, a bookshelf lined with dog-eared paperbacks I'd rescued from used stores, a desk, cheap but sturdy, where my dreams were drafted and edited until they became contracts. I remember standing in that empty apartment the day I signed the lease, feeling like I had stepped into a sacred temple I had built with calloused hands and sleepless nights. No parties, no loud declarations, just a whispered promise to myself. This is yours, and no one can take it. But no one didn't include blood. I hadn't learned that lesson yet. They say betrayal doesn't surprise you. It reminds you of what you always feared deep down, that your sacrifices don't count unless they're convenient to someone else. That love, especially the family kind, can come wrapped in obligation, delivered like a favor, but tied with chains you're expected to smile through. It was a Sunday dinner, the kind I still showed up for out of guilt, out of habit. My mother made her lemon rosemary chicken like she always did. My father dominated the conversation like he always did. My older brother, Julian, arrived an hour late, kissed everyone on the cheek, and poured himself the last of the wine without apology. And me, I was quiet, as usual. Not small, just restrained. I had learned over the years that my presence had to be folded neatly, like a cloth napkin beside a plate, useful only when called for. That was when it happened. Between bites of salad, my father cleared his throat the ceremonial announcement that something was about to be decided, and I should brace myself. Your sister needs a place to stay, he said plainly, without looking at me. Her lease is up, and the timing isn't ideal. We think she should stay with you. We think, not what do you think, not would it be okay, just a decree wrapped in parental concern. My mother nodded like it had already been arranged. My sister, Ava, sipped her wine with that familiar entitlement, the kind only bestowed upon youngest children. Born with soft hands and untarnished reputations, I felt the air leave my lungs. There was no explosion, no scene, just a silence so loud it rang in my ears. Because in that moment, my body remembered every time I was volunteered without consent. Every childhood summer where my weekends were traded for babysitting, without even asking if I had plans. Every family gathering where my opinions were overridden by what's best for everyone. And now they had offered up my peace, my sacred space, my home. I nodded. That's what I did. I nodded and took another sip of water, pretending to think, but something inside me cracked. Not broke, cracked. Like the first split in a dam. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked through my apartment barefoot, touching the walls like they were proof I still existed. My desk, my coffee mug, the lavender candle that burned beside my window. I wasn't just protecting square footage, I was protecting identity, a life I had carved out one sacrifice at a time. And they were asking me to hand it over like a hotel room, a temporary fix for someone else's recklessness. They framed it as kindness, as family. But what they didn't understand was that peace isn't something you borrow. It's not a couch someone crashes on, or a bedroom someone paints over. Peace is fought for, bled for, and I had paid my price in full. They expected me to obey because I always had, but this time, I didn't plan to explain. I planned to act, because sometimes the loudest form of rebellion is simply not showing up when they expect you to be waiting. The next morning, I stood in the shower longer than usual, not because I was lost in thought, but because I knew once I stepped out, there'd be no going back. You see, when you've spent your life being the one who understands, the one who sacrifices, the one who gets it, your silence becomes their permission. They begin to rely on your restraint like oxygen. They count on your absence of resistance. It's not cruelty. Necessarily, it's entitlement quietly earned over years of you not fighting back. But something shifted in me that night after dinner. It wasn't rage. It wasn't defiance. It was clarity. I dried off, put the kettle on, and sat at my desk, the one they said could be Ava's new art corner, and opened my laptop. First, my lease agreement. I'd read it when I signed, but now I was reading with intention, searching for the clauses that would be my armor. And there it was. Guests longer than 2 weeks required management approval. No subletting without consent. A protective wall of ink and legality standing between me and their plans. And like Edison in the lab or Carnegie staring down steel beams, I turned frustration into focus. I started making lists, not of what I needed to do, but of what I wouldn't allow anymore. No more being the family doormat in heels and lipstick. No more sacrificing my well-being in the name of appearances. No more whispered complaints followed by reluctant compliance. This time, I would act, not argue. I called Derek a coworker and the closest thing I had to an ally in my professional world. He was in the middle of a housing crisis of his own. His condo needing sudden mold remediation that had rendered it unlivable for weeks. You said you needed a place for a while. I told him, how do you feel about staying at mine for 2 weeks? Quiet building, fully furnished. The only condition, you can't open the door for anyone who isn't me. There was a pause on the other end of the phone. Is this a horror movie or an opportunity? It's a line in the sand, I said, and I need someone to help me draw it. He laughed and then agreed. And just like that, my space had a shield. I wasn't trying to create drama. I wasn't trying to punish my family. I was trying to protect something sacred, my growth. And sometimes, when they won't listen to your words, you let your silence speak volumes. That week, I moved my valuables into a small storage unit, set up a camera at the entry, drafted a sublease agreement, cleared it with management. By the time Saturday arrived, the day they had chosen to bring Ava over with her things, everything was in place. I left at dawn, 3 hours away, by the coast, in a quiet room with sea-salted air and the sound of waves instead of voices. I waited. Around 11:00, my phone began to vibrate. First, a call from my mother, then 2 from my father. A string of texts followed, ranging from logistical to accusatory. Where are you? We're downstairs. Can't get into the building. This is ridiculous. Elise, we're trying to help Ava. The irony nearly choked me. Help. That word had become a knife. They were trying to help Ava by trespassing on the one thing I had built entirely on my own. They were helping her by taking from me again. At 11:50, Derek texted me a single photo. My father outside the apartment door, speaking to security. My mother holding 2 garment bags. Ava in the background, wearing sunglasses indoors and an expression of wounded royalty. I didn't respond, because this wasn't a negotiation. This was a boundary. At 11:40, a voicemail came in from my dad. You've made your point. This is childish, Elise. But fine, enjoy your solitude. We'll discuss this later. And in that one line, he revealed everything. To them, my peace was a performance. My choices were mood swings. My independence was rebellion, not growth. They hadn't seen me, not really, but that wasn't my problem anymore. Because on that Saturday morning, as the sun filtered through gauzy curtains and the tide crept in just past the dunes, I took the deepest breath I'd inhaled in years and felt the weight of expectation lift off my shoulders like a soaked coat finally set down. I wasn't trying to make a statement. I wasn't looking for applause. I was just done. Done being the one who always made room. Done giving the benefit of the doubt while no one gave me the dignity of choice. That afternoon, I walked barefoot through the wet sand. A seagull tracked me from above. A child flew a kite in the distance, the string taut in the wind held tight. But free, and that was me now, tethered to nothing, held by no assumption, carried only by my own conviction that I was worthy of the space I had earned and entitled to protect it. Not because I needed to win, but because I had finally stopped losing myself. The messages kept coming, Sunday morning, as the sky over the coast swirled with mist and seagulls cried like restless memories. My phone flashed like a warning beacon, not because of danger, but because the storm I had finally turned away from wasn't ready to stop following me. One text from my mother read, "Ava's devastated. We're just trying to keep the family together." Another from my father, "This stunt ends now. You don't abandon your sister in her time of need." Stunt. That's what it was to them. Not a statement. Not self-respect. Not the first real act of autonomy I'd ever made in my adult life. No, to them, it was petulance in high heels, a tantrum in lipstick. But what they called a stunt, I called strategy, a long overdue correction, the kind that breaks patterns. Not people, the kind that makes noise not for attention, but for survival. Because when you've been trained to swallow discomfort to avoid disappointing others, your silence becomes currency, a bargaining chip everyone trades except you. You're just the vault that keeps giving. But not anymore. As I walked along the edge of the water, foam curling over my toes, I remembered something I had read about Henry David Thoreau, how he escaped to Walden Pond not to run, but to return to himself, to strip life down to its bare bones and see what remained. That's what this weekend was. My own Walden, my own silent revolution. Because sometimes peace isn't quiet. Sometimes it's loud in its stillness, defiant in its calm, and healing in its refusal to explain itself. That afternoon, I sat at a cafe on the boardwalk, watching families pass by, laughing over ice cream cones and sunburns. A young girl ran by holding a kite, her father trailing behind, smiling, just close enough to guide her, but far enough to let her run. I watched that scene longer than I expected. Something about it felt foreign, tender, safe, and I wondered, not bitterly, but honestly, why that never felt like my reality. My parents loved me. I never doubted that. But it was the kind of love that smothered, that measured affection in obedience, that awarded proximity when I performed, and distance when I didn't. They had rules about everything except respect, rules about curfews, grades, how many hours I could work during school, what I wore to dinner, but no rules that protected my autonomy, no boundaries they ever honored if it conflicted with what they decided was best. And so I grew up learning that love was earned by compliance. That to be good. I had to be useful. That to be seen. I had to be silent. But something happened when I got that apartment. When I turned the key that first night and sat alone in the golden quiet of my own space. No one calling my name, no footsteps in the hallway, no voice critiquing the dishes in the sink or the length of my skirt. I met myself, not the daughter, not the sister, just Elise, and once I met her, I couldn't unsee her. She was capable, kind, tired, and completely unprepared to be owned. The text from Ava that night said, "I don't understand why you're doing this. You're the strong one. You always help." That sentence burned the way truth does when it's twisted into manipulation. Because that's exactly why I couldn't help this time. Because they didn't need me. They expected me to fold like I always had. To smile through the ache. To share what I worked for without hesitation, even if it cost me my peace. But help isn't given under duress. It's offered from wholeness, not guilt. And I wasn't whole. Not yet. I was still building. Still recovering from years of being told I was so mature for my age, which is just another way of saying, we're going to rely on you before you're ready, and shame you when you break. The guilt tried to creep in that night, like fog under a door. But I opened the window instead, let the sea air drown it out. Because I remembered something Edison once said. I have not failed. I've just found 10, 0 ways that won't work. Well, I'd found every way that didn't work to set boundaries with my family. Explaining didn't work. Justifying didn't work. Asking nicely didn't work. Crying didn't work. But this year's asakin fanas, this silence, This sudden absence of the always available daughter, this worked. Because when they showed up and found someone else answering the door, they finally realized the door wasn't theirs to open. The next morning, I drove back to the city, not with dread, but with the quiet readiness of a woman returning to her battlefield not to fight, but to reclaim what was always hers. And when I stepped into my apartment, greeted only by the hum of the refrigerator and the faint scent of lavender still clinging to the pillows, I smiled. Because I was home, truly home, not just in space, but in self. And no one was going to take that from me again. I stepped through the doorway and closed it behind me, not like I was shutting out the world, but like I was sealing a vault, not with anger, not even with fear. With knowing, the kind of knowing that changes your posture, that makes you sit taller, breathe deeper, speak slower, because you've finally stopped apologizing for needing to be alone in what you built. Derek had left the apartment spotless. The keys rested on the kitchen counter beside a note scribbled in his familiar, precise handwriting. Handled everything. Nothing but respect. D. I stood there for a moment, hand resting on the note, feeling an ache I hadn't expected. Gratitude. Real, heavy gratitude, not for what Derek had done, but for what he'd not done. He hadn't questioned me, hadn't needed me to explain the backstory of my boundaries, hadn't tried to fix it, reframe it, or downplay it. He'd just protected the line I drew, and that made him rare. You learn, over time, that it's not just the people who hurt you that you need to watch out for. It's the ones who insist that being hurt isn't a big deal. The ones who say, "You're overreacting. That's just how families are." As if being related gives them the right to rewrite your life. As if blood erases boundaries. I've heard it my whole life from cousins, uncles, teachers, even friends. But they're your family, yes. And that's why it cuts deeper. That's why it matters more. That's why it isn't okay. I made tea, sat at my desk, lit the lavender candle they once suggested removing to make space for Ava's creative energy. And I opened the emails. My father had written the subject line like a court summons. Marie, unacceptable behavior. In it, he detailed the financial inconvenience they had endured by renting a truck for furniture that had nowhere to go. The stress on Ava. The embarrassment. The inconsideration. The absence of maturity. It was Rich being accused of immaturity by a man who made life-altering decisions for his children without asking. And at the bottom of the email, almost as an afterthought, he wrote, "We'll be arriving next Saturday to speak in person. Make time, make time." As if my life had a blank spot waiting for them to fill. As if the same man who had once said, "You're old enough to take care of yourself," when I begged him to help me pay for textbooks, now had the audacity to think he could still schedule my time without consent. I didn't respond. I forwarded the email to myself under the subject line, "Evidence of expectation." Then I opened my journal and wrote something I hadn't dared say out loud yet. I don't owe anyone access to my life, not even the people who gave it to me. It was harsh, but it was true. And truth doesn't always arrive in kindness. Sometimes it arrives in discomfort. Sometimes it sounds like your own voice, finally echoing off walls that used to absorb every plea for peace. That week passed in strange stillness. No more daily texts. No check-ins. Just silence. I thought it would make me anxious, but it didn't. It made me clear. The pressure had lifted, and in its place was space. Space to think, to feel, to ask myself a question no one had ever asked me growing up. What do you want, Elise? Not what should you do? Not what's the right thing for everyone else. Just, what do you want? And I realized I wanted more of this. Not the conflict, not the separation, but the agency. I wanted a life where my decisions weren't up for debate over dinner, where my voice wasn't measured by its compliance, where no didn't invite war, where I didn't have to explain exhaustion, or loneliness, or the need to be left alone for once. I wanted relationships that respected the quiet kind of love, the kind that doesn't ask for your space, but offers support from the doorway, waiting for an invitation. Saturday came, and with it, so did they. My building has a glass lobby. I could see them before they saw me standing just outside the doors. My father in his pressed shirt, holding a folder like it contained truth. My mother in her pastel cardigan, clutching her purse like a lifeline. Ava, arms folded, sunglasses on again. Like armor. I could have walked out. I could have opened the door. But I didn't. Instead, I walked slowly. Deliberately. To the front desk. Tanya, I said to the manager, if anyone asks for me today, I'm not available. Building policy says no unauthorized entry. Right. She looked at me with soft eyes, like she knew more than I had told her. Correct, she said, and I nodded. That was it. No showdown. No screaming match in the lobby. No dramatic scene for the neighbors. Just boundaries enforced, not with anger, but with policies. With quiet. With calm, because you don't need to fight when you're finally done performing for approval. When I returned to my apartment, I waited. I watched the security camera footage as they stood there for 15 minutes, talking, pointing, calling, waving their phones in frustration. And then they left. And I sat in the sunlight of my own living room, every ray landing on my skin like confirmation. I had chosen peace and kept it, not because they gave it to me, but because I refused to give it away. There's a peculiar quiet that settles after you enforce a boundary no one expected you to keep. It's not the kind of quiet that comes from resolution. It's the kind that comes from recalibration, like the silence after a power outage, when everything restarts, but differently, slower, dimmer, unsure. That Sunday morning, the city was still sleeping. The sun hadn't fully risen yet. It peeked through the blinds like it was cautious, like it didn't want to intrude either. I sat at the edge of my bed, blanket still wrapped around me, not because I was cold, but because I felt bare in a new way. No war had been declared, no speeches made. But still, I had changed something, and once you change it, there's no going back. You can't retreat into the version of you who once tolerated what now feels unbearable. My phone buzzed once. A single message. Ava, I didn't know they hadn't talked to you. No emojis. No exclamation points. Just that it was the first thing any of them had said to me that didn't feel like pressure in disguise. And I believed her. Because if there's one thing I've learned about dysfunction, it's that the people involved are often just playing roles written for them before they understood how scripts worked. Ava was always the delicate one. The artistic one, the one who got attention because she needed it or was told she did. I was the capable one. The responsible one. The one who got attention only when I stopped functioning. So she didn't question the arrangement because the arrangement had always benefited her. And I didn't question my resentment because I had finally started letting myself feel it. Resentment is a strange thing. It builds slowly. Like rust, unnoticed, unremarked. Until suddenly the hinges don't move and you wonder when things stopped working. But it's not the door's fault. It's what you didn't oil. What you ignored. And I had ignored a lot. Years of it. The birthday dinners where I paid the bill while my brother ordered cocktails and my dad conveniently left his wallet. The graduation party Ava got for her art certificate, while mine for my master's degree, was reduced to a group text that said, "Congrats. Kiddo, the time I got a job offer in a new city and my mom cried because it meant I wouldn't be around to help out anymore. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake, fully, frighteningly awake. And in that wakefulness, I realized something that took my breath away. I had never made a decision for myself that didn't require someone else's approval. Not one. Every move had been calculated to minimize conflict. Every yes laced with internal resistance. Every no carefully padded with justification to soften the blow for everyone else. Until now, I picked up my phone and typed a reply to Ava. They didn't, and I wasn't fine with it. I left it at that, because clarity doesn't need decoration. Later that day, I got a call from my brother. Julian. He never got involved. He was the neutral one. The diplomat. The let's just keep the peace sibling who always showed up late and left early, but knew how to read a room better than anyone. He didn't start with hello. He started with, so. That was a hell of a move. I laughed before I could stop myself. It wasn't a joyful laugh. It was the kind that escapes when you realize someone finally noticed the cost of your composure. I said, I know, he replied. And in that silence, I heard something I hadn't heard from my family in a long time. Respect, not agreement, not approval, but something deeper. Recognition. Julian didn't try to fix it. He didn't play mediator. He just said, I'll talk to them. They'll come around. I didn't ask him to. I didn't expect them to. But I appreciated the offer, because what I needed wasn't understanding. It was space. Real, actual, uninterrupted space to breathe. To choose, to exist. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to fill that space with explanation. I filled it with music, with slow walks to nowhere, with books I had bought but never read, with sleeping in until sunlight crept across my sheets without the alarm insisting I be useful. I filled it with dinners cooked slowly, for no one but me, with long showers that steamed the windows and cleared more than just my pores, with journal pages that didn't censor the truth to protect anyone else's feelings. And little by little, my body began to trust me again. My anxiety didn't disappear, but it quieted. My jaw unclenched. My shoulders dropped. I stopped waiting for a shoe to drop, for a favor to be asked, for the next obligation to land in my lap like a bomb. And one evening, as I sat watching the sunset from my apartment window, the same one they once wanted to cover with blackout curtains, because Ava needed creative lighting, I realized something sacred. This was the first season of my life that I wasn't performing in. I wasn't the dutiful daughter. Wasn't the middle sibling buffer. Wasn't the fallback. Is the plan B, the responsible one who would always say yes. I was just Elise, and she was enough. Days passed, then weeks, and with time came the thing I feared the most. Not confrontation, but quiet, not the peaceful kind. The uncertain kind. The kind where no one calls, no one texts. The silence wasn't empty, it was crowded with assumptions. Judgments, quiet wars fought in the heads of people who never say what they mean, but always mean what they expect. But here's the truth. No one tells you when you finally step out of your role in a dysfunctional family. Peace is not the absence of noise, it's the presence of self. It took me years to understand that, and now that I did, I couldn't unlearn it. I couldn't shrink again. Couldn't pretend I didn't notice how much of my life had been shaped around the comfort of others. You start seeing it everywhere once your eyes are open. In how you answer emails. In how you explain yourself unnecessarily. In how you hesitate before saying no as if no is a bomb you need to defuse. You notice how you used to say, I'm sorry, I can't. Instead of just saying, that doesn't work for me. You realize your voice had a tremble, not because you lacked conviction, but because you feared the cost of using it. That fear, it didn't come from strangers. It came from people who said they loved me, but only when I was convenient. People who loved me, but only when I agreed. That's the thing about family dynamics that run on unspoken rules. The minute you break one even gently, you become a threat to the entire illusion. And so they pull back, not always with anger. Sometimes with coldness, sometimes with silence, sometimes with martyrdom, and that's exactly what happened. My mother called once, just once. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Your father and I are very hurt. We only ever did what we thought was best for the family. We love you, but this has been very difficult. I played it twice, not because I didn't understand it, but because I wanted to make sure I wasn't imagining the absence of responsibility. The careful framing of their pain as the main event, as if mine had been an inconvenience they endured. They loved me, but they never apologized. They missed me, but they never asked how I felt. They were hurt, but never curious about the bruise they left. This is what emotional rewriting looks like. It's how people keep power without ever raising their voice. They offer guilt as olive branches. They suggest compromise, but always on terms that look suspiciously like the original offense. And that's when I knew healing wasn't going to be an apology. Healing was going to be what I chose to allow and what I quietly, permanently refused. It wasn't about revenge. This wasn't payback. This wasn't cutting people off. This was transformation. And transformation doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it looks like letting the phone ring and not reaching for it. Sometimes it looks like saying, "No, I'm not coming home for the holidays this year," and letting the silence stand. Sometimes it looks like helping someone move and then not inviting them in afterward. Not because you hate them, not because you're bitter, but because they no longer have a key. They had a key to your childhood, to your automatic compliance, but not to the home you built, the one made of your own decisions, your own silence, your own peace. And once you change the locks, you'll be amazed how many people only loved you when you left the door open. Julian texted me again. They're not mad anymore, just confused. You sure you don't want to talk to them? I appreciated the neutrality, the diplomacy, but confusion is not the same as care. Confusion is what happens when people are forced to confront a version of you they didn't prepare for. And no, I didn't want to talk yet. Because sometimes when you find your voice, the last thing you should do is immediately use it to comfort the people who silenced it in the first place. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was tired. Tired of making everyone else feel comfortable. While I sat in discomfort so long, it started feeling like home. Tired of being the one who always showed up to explain myself. This time, they would have to sit in the not knowing, let the silence work on them. Because this time, I wasn't going to rush in to fix the discomfort they created. This time, I was building something more valuable than harmony. I was building self-respect, and I had saved too long, worked too hard, bled too much, to give it away without asking. I started noticing something odd around the third week of silence. I didn't miss the chaos. I didn't miss the check-in calls that came with hidden favors. Didn't miss the family dinners that left me emotionally hungover. Didn't miss the forced small talk with Ava while she scrolled through her phone, pausing only to mention something new she wanted from my apartment, a lamp. A chair, a corner of quiet. For the first time in my adult life, I had margin, space to sit still without feeling like I owed someone something. Space to dream without someone else's crisis breathing down my neck. And that's when the guilt started to show up differently. Not from them, from me. Because no one talks about what happens after the boundary is drawn. After the door stays shut, you expect to feel empowered, triumphant, free. But instead, sometimes you feel haunted by the what-ifs. What if I was too harsh? What if they're really hurting? What if I'm becoming cold? And then the memories come back. Not the bad ones, the good ones. The ones that make you question everything you're trying to heal from. Your mother braiding your hair before your first recital. Your father helping you with algebra at the kitchen table. Ava crawling into your bed after her first heartbreak. Whispering, "Don't tell them I cried." These moments don't disappear just because you're wounded. That's what makes families so hard to unravel. It's not all trauma. It's entanglement. It's the ache of almost, the grief of sometimes, the nostalgia of not always, but that's the lie you have to untangle. That good moments erase harmful patterns. They just complicate them. And one night, as I stood at my window watching the city hum beneath me, people walking, lights blinking, windows glowing, I whispered to myself a truth I wasn't ready to say out loud yet. You can love them and still protect yourself from them. That sentence felt like a cracked bell, familiar, but hard to ring. Because I was raised to believe love meant self-erasure, that to be good, I had to say yes. To be close, I had to comply. To be family, I had to be accessible. But what if love could exist with doors? With pauses? With space? I didn't want to exile my family from my life. I just wanted to exist in mine without being repurposed for theirs. I wanted a version of us that didn't require my silence to keep it intact. And so I reached out, but not to apologize. To initiate a new story, I texted Ava first. Want to meet for lunch? Just us. No agendas? She responded instantly. Yes. Been waiting for this. We met at a small cafe downtown, one she used to love when she was going through her bohemian phase. She wore the same denim jacket with paint stains on the sleeves, and a nervous smile that said more than words ever could. She looked at me across the table and didn't even wait for the food. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have checked with you. I didn't think, I thought you'd be fine with it because, well, you're always fine with everything." There it was. The role. The myth, the part I had played so well, she had started believing it. I nodded slowly. "I'm not angry at you," I said. "I'm angry at how easily everyone assumed I'd fold. And that includes me." She blinked. "You, yay." Me, I expected myself to go along with it too, right up until I didn't. She stirred her iced coffee. Quiet. "So where do we go from here?" I thought for a moment. Then said, "Somewhere real. No pretending. No assigning roles. No borrowing things that weren't offered." She smiled. "Even if it's slower. Especially if it's slower." We talked for hours. About everything. Childhood. Pressure. Shame. Dreams. And beneath all of it, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time with anyone in my family. Honesty. Not the kind that explodes. The kind that unfolds. And Ava surprised me. "I've always envied you," she said. "Everyone thought I was fragile and you were strong, but I was allowed to fall apart. You weren't." That landed in my chest like a weight I didn't know I'd been carrying. Maybe we had both been shaped by the same system, just in different molds. The next day, my mother called. I didn't answer, but I did call her back. When I was ready, and when I did, she cried. Not dramatically, not manipulatively, just openly. "I didn't realize how much we'd put on you," she said. "You've always been so capable. I thought we were admiring you. I didn't know we were using you." I didn't cry, but I listened. And for once, I felt like she was seeing me, not just my usefulness. I told her I forgave her. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to let go of the weight that wasn't mine. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give the offender. It's the key that unlocks your own prison door. It doesn't erase the past. It just stops letting it write the present. And slowly, the family I thought I had to run from started becoming a family I could walk beside at my own pace. Not because they changed overnight, but because I changed and I stopped shrinking to fit what they needed. Healing, I learned, is not a destination. It's not a final act where everyone hugs, cries, and rolls credits under a swelling soundtrack. It's 1,000 tiny decisions. It's learning to speak calmly when your instinct is to defend. It's saying, "Let me get back to you," instead of an automatic yes. It's holding the line when your voice shakes, and even more when it doesn't. It's resisting the urge to return to old roles just because someone else is uncomfortable with the new you. That was the real test. Not the day I enforced the boundary, not the week after, when I held my ground in silence, but the days that followed when the dust began to settle, and I was invited back into the old dynamic in subtle, seductive ways. Because here's what no one tells you about growing. The moment you change, they'll pretend it never happened. They'll test the waters with small asks. A text about Thanksgiving, a question about spare keys, a suggestion that maybe Ava can still use the office just for a few days while she works on a project. And every time, I had to ask myself, is this a step forward or a rerun of the past wrapped in prettier packaging? I said no, gently, and consistently, kindly. Not just to them, but to the version of me that still believed she had to prove her worth through sacrifice. And every time I did, I felt something settle inside me, like furniture finally placed in the right room. Ava found a new apartment. Small, bright, and entirely hers. She invited me over one Saturday and showed me the space with a kind of pride I hadn't seen in her before. "It's not fancy," she said, brushing a paint-splattered towel off the counter. "But it's mine." I smiled. That's the best kind of place. And when she offered me the guest key, I paused, not because I didn't want it, but because I wanted to be sure. "Only if you mean it." And I said, she nodded. "Serious, only if you want it." That's the thing. Boundaries don't destroy love. They refine it. What remains after you set them is real. My parents changed too, in their own slow way. My father still defaulted to authority, but softened his tone. My mother still overstepped sometimes. But now, she apologized without prompting. We started having real conversations, not because I begged for them, but because I stopped begging. Period. One night, I hosted dinner. My rules. My space, no assumptions. It was the same pot roast recipe my mom used to make. But this time, I was the one choosing the ingredients. We sat around the table, the same people, but not the same story. My dad asked about my job, but listened longer. My mother complimented the apartment without suggesting rearrangements. Ava asked if she could light the candle on the windowsill, the one they once tried to replace. And I realized this wasn't about winning. This wasn't revenge. This was recognition. They weren't entitled to my space. They weren't owed my compliance. But they could be welcomed if they respected the terms. Love is not the absence of conflict. It's the presence of choice. And now, I had mine. The girl who once said yes to everything just to be included, now said yes only to the things that let her remain whole. And that girl was finally becoming a woman. One who could say no without guilt. One who could say yes without fear. One who could live, not from obligation, but from clarity. My apartment wasn't just a place. It was a metaphor. Brick by brick, shift by shift, dollar by dollar, I built it. I earned it. And when they tried to give it away without asking, I did the most radical thing I had ever done. I said, this far and no further. And in doing so, I taught them something I had waited my whole life for them to understand. That I'm not just part of this family. I'm a whole person. Some people think reclaiming your power is an event, a mic drop moment, a single thunderclap that finally silences the storm. But I know better now. It's not a lightning strike. It's a sunrise. Slow, subtle, relentless. One soft light at a time, washing over everything you thought you had to accept. It's not shouting, I'm free. From rooftops, it's sitting quietly at your own table, sipping tea, and realizing no one barges in anymore. Not because you slammed the door, but because you removed the welcome mat that used to say, use me. The months that followed weren't always graceful. There were stumbles, setbacks, slips. Old habits die hard, especially the ones taught to you by people you loved. There were times I still felt the urge to over-explain, to apologize when I hadn't done anything wrong, to offer too much, too fast, just to make the discomfort go away. But I learned to pause, to let the tension stretch instead of sprinting to fill it, to sit in the discomfort and realize I wouldn't die from it. Because that's what they don't tell you about setting boundaries. The most dangerous thing you'll ever feel isn't rejection, it's peace. Because peace demands you confront who you are without anyone else's noise. And that silence, that space, it exposes everything. The need to be needed, the fear of being unloved if you're inconvenient, the belief that worth is measured by what you give away, not what you protect. I had to meet all those ghosts. And I did, not all at once, not perfectly, but honestly, and in doing so, I reintroduced myself to the one person I had neglected the most. Me? Not the achiever, not the helper, not the fixer, just me. I started writing again, not for clients, not for praise, but for myself. Words poured out that had waited years to be heard, not crafted, not polished, just true. I filled journals with stories I'd buried under family obligation. Stories of pain, of pride, of power. And one night, I wrote this line, you can be loyal and still leave. It stopped me cold. Because for so long, I believed those two things couldn't exist together. That to be loyal meant staying always. But that's not loyalty. That's captivity. Real loyalty, it's truth. It's honesty. It's saying, I love you, and I can't let you hurt me anymore. It's walking away not to punish them, but to protect the parts of you they never took the time to see. I still visited home sometimes, but now I chose the time, the duration, the terms. If a conversation started to edge into disrespect, I ended it. If a favor was asked that crossed my limits, I declined. Not coldly, not cruelly, just clearly. And over time, they adjusted. Not overnight, not without resistance. But they did, because people learn how to treat you when you stop teaching them to ignore your no. Ava changed too. She started seeing a therapist. She stopped using her emotions as excuses. She apologized more often and without the performance that used to make her apologies feel like theater. We weren't best friends, but we were honest, and that was more valuable. My mother changed slowly. Her efforts were clumsy at first. She'd ask questions and answer them for me in the same breath-old habits. Hard to break. But every time I paused and gently said, "That's not what I meant," she'd blink and nod. She was trying, and that was enough. My father, still the hardest, still the last to apologize, still held firm to the idea that I had embarrassed the family with how I handled things. But even he grew quieter around me. Not silent, just less assumptive. One evening, months after it all, he and I stood in the kitchen, side by side. Making coffee, no conversation, just clinking spoons and steam rising between us. And then he said, "Your apartment's nice. You've done well." No apology, no ownership, but also no criticism. It wasn't approval I craved anymore. It was recognition. And maybe that was his version of it. Maybe that's all I'd ever get. And maybe that was okay. Because I wasn't the same girl anymore. The one who used to sit at the dinner table biting her tongue. The one who said yes because she didn't know she was allowed to say no. The one who mistook silence for strength and sacrifice for worth. She was gone. And in her place stood a woman who had saved for 5 years, not just for an apartment, but for a life that didn't beg for belonging, a life that didn't barter peace for permission, a life where everything she had space, silence, success was hers, because she had chosen it. Every square foot, every quiet evening, every boundary, drawn not in anger, but in love for herself. The greatest revenge is not anger. It's not silence. It's not even success in the way they define it, the kind you parade at reunions, the kind that earns you backhanded compliments and questions about how you did it all by yourself. No, the greatest revenge is peace, the kind that no one can touch. Not because it's hidden, but because you've stopped asking for permission to keep it, the kind that settles in your bones, making you soft where you were once brittle, strong where you were once exhausted. That's the kind of peace I live in now. I don't flaunt it. I don't post about it. But you can feel it in the way I answer the phone calmly, in the way I say, "I'm not available that day," and offer no further explanation. In the way I've reclaimed no as a full sentence, not a provocation. It lives in the rhythm of my mornings unhurried, uninterrupted, in the fact that my apartment still smells like lavender and ambition untouched by the chaos they once tried to move in without asking. It lives in the photo frames that sit exactly where I chose them. The art on the walls that no one critiques. The bookshelf no longer waiting to be cleared for someone else's storage. This apartment is still mine. But more importantly, so is my life. I stopped being the backup plan. Stopped being the emotional landfill for other people's mess. Stopped playing the role I was assigned without ever auditioning. And you know what happened? I started becoming someone I respected, not just someone they expected. That's what they don't tell you about boundaries. They don't just protect you. They introduce you to yourself. And now, I like who I meet every morning in the mirror. She's not perfect, not polished, not always understood, but she is hers. Wholly, unapologetically, irrevocably. And if there's one thing I want to leave you with, one truth carved from every sleepless night, every uncomfortable decision, every trembling word I said aloud when my voice wanted to disappear, it's this. You don't owe anyone access to what you bled to build. Not your time, not your space, not your peace, not your home, not your heart. If they want to be part of your life, let them knock, let them ask, let them wait if they have to. Because love is not measured by what you give up. It's measured by what they're willing to honor. And if they truly love you, they'll honor what you fought for. So if you're listening to this, wondering if you're allowed to say no, you are, If you're wondering whether peace is worth the fallout, it is. If you're standing at the edge of your own boundary, shaking with fear because you've never drawn a line before, draw it anyway. Because what's on the other side of that fear is freedom, and it's waiting for you, just like it waited for me. My name is Elise Tran, and I saved for 5 years to have peace. They tried to take it without asking, and I finally said no, not with rage, not with fire, but with a locked door, a steady voice, and a life that no longer negotiates with guilt. And that's the beginning of everything.